All right, good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to Leadership Matters, Informing Leaders, Inspiring Solutions. I'm Dr. Loretta Howard, your lead co-host today, and I am delighted to have with me our co-host, Dr. Sheryl White and Dr. Undraye Howard. Today, we are continuing our discussion on essential leadership and bench strength development during turbulent times. Joining us as a guest today to help with this conversation is our wonderful friend, Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, who is the Vice President of Impact and Culture for the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans out of New Orleans, Louisiana. So today we're going to get started with our first audience question. And that question is, what advice would you give to other leaders about maintaining trust within their teams during tough times? We'll start with Dr. Sheryl.
Okay. Well, Dr. Loretta, I'd say uh, maintaining trust during turbulent times, proactively and probably overly communicating would be something that I might would suggest as something that will be important. And I think empathy from the perspective of hearing and then also not just hearing, but responding to and as best as we can, addressing concerns in a caring way and in an honest way. And also, I think one of the things that really helps to reduce stress, Zig Ziglar used to say the number one metaphor for stress is gratitude. So I think even in the midst of those challenging times to express gratitude and look for and celebrate still those small wins and expressing hope and a positive outlook, not only for the organization, but for the people that so that people can feel some positivity regarding our vision for them as well as for the organization are some thoughts that come to mind.
All right, great. Thank you, Dr. Dre.
Yeah, I think especially during tough times, this trust really becomes very fragile and certainly much more critical. I would just add to what Dr. White has offered up, but one being be transparent, right? Be transparently honest about what you know and what you don't know, and communicate that often. I think is really key critical during these times as well. And so, a very powerful question from our listener, whoever submitted this question, because it's a very important piece to kind of focus in on, especially as we think about the times we're going through now, a lot of change, uncertainty as part of that process. And so I would just, again, just reinforce, be honest, transparent, and continue to communicate as you go through the process.
Okay, excellent. All right, Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, we'd like you to answer that question as well. So what do you think about that?
I'm happy to. I think conversations around trust is very central to the work that I do as a culture strategist. When I think about trust, a lot of times when I'm having conversations with organizational leaders and really coming to understand their culture, what I am finding is that employees typically find that there's a disconnect in communication, right? There's a disconnect between what they're experiencing and what they're being told. And so when we're having conversations around trust, similar to Dr. Howard's point, is you got to be transparent with people. People can read between when there's a disconnect, they pick up on it. And if they don't feel like you're giving them the authentic truth and they don't feel like they can trust you, right? And so you want to be open, you want to be honest about where we are. People are not afraid of the truth. What they are afraid and what they become frustrated about is when they're left in the dark. And so in the book that I'm writing now, I talk about this triad of trust, right? Are you doing what you say you're going to do? Right? Are you doing it consistently? Right? And are you doing it with the right intentions? And when you have all three of those, trust is established. But if one of those are missing, it's very difficult to establish trust within your teams, within your organizations, and within your interpersonal relationships. And so it's always about, keeping your word, keeping that word consistently and doing it with the best intentions in mind.
All right, great. Thank you. And I agree with everything that all of you have said. The one thing that I would add to that is if you make a mistake as a leader, be honest and just admit, yes, I made a mistake. we're not perfect and we're not trying to be. We are human beings and sometimes we will make a mistake. So we need to own that and not push it off or act like it didn't happen, those kind of things. And I think that also the honesty with people, that's a part of the transparency. And people want that. They want to know that they have that leader they can trust and admit it if we make a mistake. So thank you so much, everyone. So with that, Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, would you please share a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey?
Absolutely. Well, I would say thank you so much for having me here. This is such a full circle moment. And I remember years ago when I was a student, right? Both you and Dr. Howard, both Dr. Howards, right? I was a student of both of yours. And so to be here today is such full circle, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you all so much. I would say, for me, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you ask T-Pain, Wisconsin, right? And first generation, came from a single parent mom who raised my brothers and I. Have always known who my dad, was, and he's deceased right now. But I came from a life of recognizing what struggle, looks like. I had never envisioned that I would be where I am today, but I was fortunate enough to make it through high school, immediately went off to college, started my career early in the banking industry, thought that I was going to establish a career in banking financial services. And this was actually second to my first career, which was, registered nursing. And that didn't work out. I realized that very early on, went into banking financial services. And then after earning my MBA, I had a real awakening moment. It was a moment of the difference between doing what I was good at and what I could do very well and doing work that was purposeful, work that I was called to. And I remember at the time I was working for PNC Investments and I had just earned my MBA and I had a conversation with my mom and I said, I'm doing really well in the banking industry. I can see myself going into investment banking at some point, but I am just really not feeling passionate about the work. I feel like there's a feeling that should come in excitement. And around that time, there was a lot of conversations about if work is meaningful and it's good, it's work that you would do, for free without getting paid for it, right? And I did not feel that thing, even though I was good at a lot of things. And so I told my mom that I was going to apply for this management training program at Quad where they were inviting people in who had just recently graduated to kind of rotate into different areas within the company. And at the time, Quad was the second largest print company in the world, and they were doing some incredible things. And my mom told me, she says, "Well, you're good at what you do. I would stay in banking, do 30 years and retire." And that was just the mindset at the time, right? And against her will, I decided to really step out on faith and apply for that role at Quad. And I was accepted into the management training program where I had the opportunity to rotate in different areas of HR. And so I did HRIS and I did employee benefits and employee relations. And it was exciting. And I will tell you that I had the opportunity to work in the employee experience sector of things and employee engagement. And as we were buying all these smaller print companies, our head of HR at the time, which was Nancy Ott, I said, "Nancy, we're buying all these companies, but how do the employees that we're acquiring come to identify with the organization, right? And how do we communicate who we are now that we're buying all these smaller companies?" And at the time, Nancy says, "Well, Darvelle, those are really great questions, but let's just keep buying and we'll figure it out along the way." And so I wasn't content with that and eventually started asking more questions, which led me to pursue a second master's degree in communication studies, where I had the opportunity to do some work around organizational identity and identification. And it really not only sparked my interest in understanding how do we connect with each other, but really my understanding around systems and power and change. And so that work then kind of morphed into my PhD work and I had the opportunity to do some DEI work early on at Cal Poly and with some of the other organizations I work for. And now I'm able to lead the social impact work on the culture work for the NFL and the NBA here at the Saints and the Pelicans. And so it was a journey of becoming, and I had many different stopping points throughout my career and many different transitions, but I count it all good, and it's a blessing to be where I am today. And I'm excited about what the future looks like.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Dre, I'm going to pass it on to you and
That's fine.
go on. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Dr. Hutchins, for that wonderful response. As we think about essential leadership and bench strength development during turbulent times, part of this comes under the umbrella of accountability.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Hutchins, if I were to ask you the question, perhaps from your past previous experiences, what approaches do you kind of use to identify and develop and hold current and maybe even emerging leaders accountable across maybe the coaching staff, the front office, even the players?
That's a really great question. For me, it's important that whatever team or organization that you're a part of, if it's an organization, to really understand what is the organization strategy, right? Who do we seek to serve? What are we aiming for? What are some of the expected outcomes? What's the vision? Where are we going? And I think that once we can lock in on that, we can then determine, okay, what's going to be required and what would it take in order for us to get there? And identifying specific outcomes and specific what body of work is going to need to happen in order for us to achieve the outcomes that we desire. And asking people based on the skills, knowledge, and ability that's at the table in all of the departments, who's going to be responsible for what in order for us to achieve these goals. And I think getting that buy-in on the front end is going to be super important so that when those goals and the things that we committed to are not being met, it's just a conversation. Where are we? Are we on track to achieving what we said we're going to do? And if we're off track, why aren't we there? Right? What can I do to better support you? What might you be able to do to better support me? And so it's really about just, having this consensus and this buy-in in terms of where we're going. And when one part of the system falls off track, making sure that we're riding the ship to ensure that we can achieve our goals.
Yeah.
Mm,
Thank you.
wonderful. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. Love that. And thinking about accountability with regards to starting with the conversation that says we're on track or not on track.
Yes.
One might say consequences. I always think of accountability as consequences. And I think that's a good first consequence. It's a great conversation. Wondering if you could think of maybe an example of when your team was actually faced with an unexpected challenge. And during that time, what you did to help ensure accountability and continuity. And what did you learn from the experience, if you can think of one?
Absolutely. So my role is rather unique. So if you look across both the NFL and the NBA, the role of the impact officer is fairly new. So, the longest standing impact officer may have been in the league for about 6 or 7 years. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I actually joined the teams about 4 seasons ago when other teams started getting impact officers. And so by way of that and just our new emergence in the league system, what we find is that there are oftentimes understaffed spaces, right? Where you have very little staff and very little resources and very little support. And so one of the biggest challenges is legitimizing the work. And what does it look like to legitimize that work and to communicate the value of these spaces in a way that we are able to garner more support and more resources? Um, and so that is a challenge, and how we resolve for that is by telling our story. What is the impact both quantitatively and qualitatively, and garnering support from other departments, right, in order to deliver on some of our programs and the initiatives that we endeavor to do. And sometimes that's challenging because people have other commitments within their respective spaces, but until you can really have that right level of support, you got to do what you got to do. And so I've been able to do an incredible job with our storytelling piece, and I think that our leadership has been fortunate with the progress that we've made as a team, and that's why this space has grown so much over the past 4 years.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. We are going to have to take a break, but when we come back, we'll do our second audience question. So please stay tuned, everyone, and we'll be right back on Leadership Matters, Informing Leaders and Inspiring Solutions. All right, we are back on Leadership Matters. For those of you who are just joining us, I am Dr. Loretta Howard, lead co-host. With me today are my wonderful co-hosts, Dr. Sheryl White and Dr. Undraye Howard. Also, our guest today is Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, who is the Vice President of Impact and Culture for the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans. So, we are so excited about our second question. Are you all ready? I hope so. So, the second audience question is, what steps do you take to ensure everyone feels included and heard, even when making tough decisions? All right, I'm gonna start with Dr. Dre this time.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, it's important, obviously, but it's interesting because the way I would approach this question and respond to it is, I really seek out voices that don't always agree with me. And I know it
Yes.
sounds a little bit odd and strange, but I want to hear, opposing voices, opposing viewpoints. Why don't you agree with Dr. Dre? I want to know. So
Yeah.
I want to unpack that. And so I have found that to be very liberating to sit and listen to someone who's totally, maybe their values against yours, their whole, lived experience is totally different. But there's something that you learn from that. And I've been able to kind of grow as a leader, hearing those voices, which are not always, singing the same solo I'm singing. And so I've come to appreciate that. So I would say, looking for those voices that you don't always are on the same page with. So,
Okay, great. And I am a witness. He really is that person. Okay, Dr. Cheryl.
And I will be the second witness to say, yes, he really is that person. We've have fondly known Dr. Dre to be the agitator. Sometimes it's to literally state the opposite just to get
Yes,
your
yes.
truth. So no, that's all good. And I agree with that. And I think that it's important that before troubling time comes, that we're always trying to show up in a way that helps to build trust. And I say building trust through compassion. So respond to you, I to you in that have really feel, and we're
Dr.
creating that
Sh-
climate.
You're going in and out, Dr. Cheryl. I'm not sure what's
Okay.
happening.
I appreciate your letting me know that. So I was saying, I think it's important for us to show up in a way and respond in a way that people really feel that we get them, we feel them, we understand their values as relates to what's important to them, and we respond. Our behavior responds in a way that demonstrates that we get them and feel them and hear them and want to be helpful to them. And in a nutshell, that's compassion, right? Showing up in a way that is demonstrating that compassion, so that we create that psychological safety, so that when tough times come, we have that container of trust. So that, as we talked about, I think in responding to our initial question, and we can have people willing to share information with us. As Dr. Dre was saying, really soliciting proactively impact others. I think it helps them to feel as if they were heard, and then actioning that feedback. And I think those are, and I think also affirming them is real important too. So giving that positive feedback around contributions that they are making, be it thoughts that they've shared or actions that they've engaged in. So just some things that come to mind.
Okay, great, wonderful. Dr. Hutchins, would you answer our audience question as well?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to decisions, sometimes you can't change the decision, but I do think that you can change how people experience, right, those decisions that are made. And I love Dr. Andre's point, particularly around inviting different perspectives, in terms of like how are people processing the information that they're receiving as it relates to decision making and change. What I find is that people want to be included, right? They want to have a say in the decision that's being made. And I think another way of me thinking about it is I want people to have conversation with me rather than around me, especially when something impacts my life, my space more directly. And I think for organizational leaders, it's important to just be mindful of that.
Mhm.
I'll also say that, when it comes to decision making, people have to understand kind of the context around it, why the decision was made, and the risk and what is the risk of not doing this, right? If we didn't lay off 5 people, what are some risks and some
Right.
implications of doing that? And I find that when you can provide more depth and context, even if you're not in the weeds or getting too granular, people start to understand and respect the decision that's being made. And so for me, context is super important.
Great, thank you. Again, I agree with everything I've heard, but something that Dr. Hutchins touched on is letting people know when you can, of course, why the decisions were made that you had to make. And sometimes you do have to make those tough decisions. You do have to, unfortunately, lay people off, reduce hours, those types of things. But as part of business decisions and goals that we have and strategies for businesses, those things can be necessary as well. And one of the things that I like to do, and it's kind of a old fashioned, but I like the little town hall meetings with everyone that we can come together, we can have the conversation, make sure people know that it's a safe space. There is not going to be any retaliation, no interruptions. Let's listen to each voice. And by that, I mean, not talking over people, one voice at a time. Let's hear what they have to say. We don't always have to agree for sure, but at least let them know that they were heard. People want their opinion to be heard by others, no matter what. So I agree with all of that. So for the audience person who sent that in, I hope we were able to address those issues in a way that they will be able to use them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sheryl, and our next topic is going to be bench strength.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Loretta. So as we think about bench strength, Dr. Hutchins will ask you maybe to share what strategies might you see being put in place to identify and develop high potential employees, particularly for future leadership roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this is a question that I wanted to give a little bit of thought to because as I think about high potential employees, I think every employee is high potential employee. I think that we have employees who are maybe in departments or in spaces where they probably are not positioned to thrive because it doesn't lend necessarily to their skills and their expertise. And so when I think about high potential, I like to have conversations with my staff and have conversations with other employees to say, what is it that you see yourself doing? What does success look like for you in your current role? Do you feel like you are, fit for this role? And is there a culture fit in terms of how we operate and how we move as an organization? And if I find that there is more kind of like buy-in and, this person is able to develop and thrive in their role, whether it be upward or lateral, then I think that we can play on their strengths. But if I find that there's too many things working against them, let's identify another department or another organization, right? That we can maybe think about developing them or think about succession planning when it relates to that particular role. And so I think everyone is high potential. It's just about finding the right space for them. I think to that point, in terms of like strengths that I prefer as a leader, it's really someone who can adapt, right? Someone who is able to kind of work their way and navigate conflict. Um, and navigate a challenging environment here within the sports space. We don't just support one team, we have two different teams. And so we've got the NBA, right, who's in season, the NFL, and sometimes those seasons overlap. And so if you're someone who is not easily able to pivot from one thing to the other, understanding that different leagues have different expectations and different deliverables, then you may not be the right person for this particular role. If you need something that is more maybe laid back or the work is, stretched out over the year as opposed to in seasons, let's kind of think about, how to develop you in that area or find a role that's only one team focused. And so just being very realistic about what the expected deliverable is, making sure that the employee feels comfortable in that deliverable, but then also making sure that, I as a leader am making intentional efforts to invest in them because I want to see them grow and evolve. Because at some point, some folks on your staff, they master the role and they're like, what's next? And maybe there
Mhm.
isn't a director position available or a vice president position available, but if I can pour into you and get you some educational training and development, give you opportunities to speak, whatever development looks like for you, because it looks different for different people, I do believe that I can make sure that you're high potential, even if not for me, for your next move, which could be at another organization.
Love it. Thank you.
Great.
Wonderful.
Dr. Hutchins, here's a trick question for you.
Okay.
Here's one. How do you balance the need for immediate performance with long-term talent pipeline development? I'm just thinking when you get to the national level in
Yes.
professional sports, you need to perform right away. It's always about performance. And I'm trying to think, is there such thing as balancing with that with long-term pipeline development? I'm thinking if you don't show up
Yeah.
every game, every season, bye. So
Yes.
what's the balance there?
I think there's a lot of truth to that statement that you just made. For me, when it comes to balance, you tackle what's most urgent, right? I think about it even from investment, kind of what's growing right now, where do you invest your money? And same when it comes to talent, what are some of our immediate needs as a sports teams, what's changing at the league level that requires our immediate attention. And I would even say that our leadership, our president operates in that way. I've been, in this position for 4 seasons now where I've been looking for additional staff and really to grow my team in a way that makes sense. And I know that I can really deepen our impact. But sometimes the league will come and they say, hey, we want more resources allocated towards your digital, or let's have a marketing campaign. Well, guess who's getting that additional headcount? It's not the guy who's been waiting for 4 seasons. It's based on kind of the direction of the league and the fact that we are, a part of a larger franchise. And so it's kind of balancing that. What is some of our priorities at the local level? What are some priorities that are happening at the league level, and how do you prioritize those things? And when you position things in that perspective, I know that I have to weigh in. It's not a no, it's just a not right now. And so it's really prioritizing what's urgent and what makes most sense in terms of the business need.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you did great on that trick question too. I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
That was wonderful. I just enjoyed everything that you were saying, Dr. Hutchins, and just thinking about. I liked what you said about every employee has high potential.
Yes.
It's just they might not be in the right area. And that is something to think about as leaders when people come into organizations. You may hire them for one position, but they might actually be a better fit somewhere else as you get to know them and learn, the capabilities and what they have, the skills that they bring. It might be for other positions. So I loved that. Right now, we're going to get ready to take a break. So please stay tuned and we'll be right back with more on Leadership Matters, informing leaders and inspiring solutions. Okay, we are back with more on Leadership Matters. For those who are just joining us, I'm Dr. Loretta Howard, and with me are my co-hosts and friends, Dr. Sheryl White and Dr. Undraye Howard. And as we stated before, our very special guest is Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, who is the Vice President of Impact and Culture for the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans. Okay, so we are going to switch gears a little bit again and talk about coaching and mentoring, Dr. Hutchins. And just based on your experience, leadership journey, either in the sports arena or other industries that you've been in, what are formal or informal coaching and mentoring programs that exist within those organizations that you encourage, you developed, and how do you feel about the programs?
Absolutely. Mentoring is super important. It's a conversation that I'm really passionate about because I don't think that I would be as successful as I am in my current role and in prior roles without having mentors. I always oftentimes share that, mentorship is not about sharing successes. It's about sharing some of those challenges and struggles and how do you navigate under pressure and finding people who are transparent enough to give you the truth. And I think that it's easy to share, and it's not that you shouldn't, right, share your successes, but I think about, my first job at the mayor's office and going into that environment, having never worked in such a formal setting and having people like Richard Badger and people who were in the mayor's office of Milwaukee at that time who was able to pour into me and say, young man, this is how you carry yourself, right? This is how you tie a tie. And like, you need to wear a suit. And not just because there was it was the right thing to do because of the culture or the environment, but I think being honest about you're showing up in this space, as a, underrepresented Black man in this space, and there's very few of us who are in these spaces. You need to show up well, right? Like very rarely do people get these opportunities, and so it was really the transparency and the honesty of the conversation that really helped me to show up in the position. And I always feel like I have to pour that back into the people that I'm called to mentor, is like giving them the truth of the politics of navigating certain spaces, so that they can win. And also realizing that, it's important to speak from a place of fact more so than emotion. And I think that sometimes we tie a lot of emotion to our experience, but one thing that you can't really argue with is the facts of the deliverables and the outcomes of the role. And so, for me, I'm always looking for people that, for myself, that have, accomplished a lot in life, people who understand both book smart and street smart, and really finding a balance in that, because I think all of those lessons kind of help me to navigate the different unique challenges that I'm in. And so I do without doubt think that mentorship is important. I will also say, to that point, sponsorship is just as important. And there is a reality where you could become overly mentored and lack sponsorship. And without the right sponsors who are name dropping you and who are speaking highly of you when the opportunity presents itself, I do think that what happens is you get people who are overdeveloped, without the opportunity. And so as we have conversations around access, how do we make sure that people are positioned for next? And as we're thinking about succession planning, that Darvelle is in mind, or, my mentees, Roderick, is in mind, as we're thinking about next, and really fueling the pipeline with people who bring, strategic ideation, people who bring grit, right, to the role that can really help to grow the portfolio or take the business to the next level. And so just as much as we're talking about mentorship, which is important, we also need those people to be in positions of power to be sponsors.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
And I think those sponsors are so important, folks, because those who are sponsors can just simply open their mouths and call your name, right? And then you're
Right.
recognized, right? You
Absolutely.
certainly get to another level of achievement. So sponsors are so important. Kind of in the same line as we talk about essential leadership and bench strength is this whole piece we call employee engagement and retention. Dr. Hutchins, what strategies have been most effective for you in keeping employees engaged, motivated during difficult periods like losing streaks, off seasons, or organizational changes? What have you found to be the most effective?
I'll say that I'll answer that differently, in different contexts. I'll say specifically related to my role in sports, one of the things that we laud ourselves on is understanding that, the power of our platforms. we say that sports is a unifier. So, as you think about difference, right, regardless of your sex or gender or your race or your social class, like sports brings people together. And when you're in that stadium, it doesn't matter what you've been through that week or even what your morning looked like. What matters is that you're locked into the moment of celebrating the team, and you recognize that you're a part of something that's bigger, right, than your day. And so, really buying into, if we know that our role is to unify communities and to amplify the brands into and that through player engagement in their community endeavors, that we can really make a huge difference when it relates to systemic issues. If we focus on our mission, that it keeps us motivated, and we know that we play an integral role in providing that experience. And so one of the things that I do with my team is I help them to understand, okay, what is the broader mission? What is the bigger impact? And so it doesn't matter that an order came in late or didn't come in on time. It doesn't matter that you experienced something this morning. I care about the human and the people, but what matters most is that we show up in the moments, and regardless of who didn't show up or what didn't happen, how do we make the most of what we've been given? And how do we make sure that when we show up to that arena or to that dome, that the employees don't experience some of the mishaps that may have happened throughout the week or on that day? And so it is that is providing them with employee resource groups that they can be a part of. We have a women's resource group. We got a Pride for our LGBTQ plus group, a Black Employees Network. We got a working parents group. And so no matter where you fall or identify, whether you be impacted directly or an ally, we've got communities of belonging that really help to build that sense of connection for our employees. And then our leagues do a really great job at providing, resources for our employees. And so our NFL provides 2 trainings per year that engages our staff in just understanding relevant topics that are happening. But then also from my seat in my department, I'm able to really invest in our organizational like learning and development, and doing fun things like maybe employees walk into their desk and they've got like a $25 gift card, or they've got like a food truck that's setting outside for them, or a snowball, after, one of our employee resource group events. And so just kind of finding ways to keep them supercharged and feeling appreciated, because it really takes humans and human power and human capital to really run this engine. If we forget the human piece, we forget to, the experience.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Want to maybe shift it and also kind of continue in that vein. I have 2 questions here I want to ask you
Yeah.
around organizational performance. First one would be, how does your department, you've kind of talked a little bit about some partnering. So how does your department collaborate with other departments to drive overall organizational performance?
Well, my department, the impact department, I primarily oversee a lot of our social responsibility work that we're doing in the community, whether that be health equity, us thinking about food insecurity, and us thinking about underrepresented groups such as those who've been justice impacted. And so as I
Mhm.
think about the work that we do, I also wear the hat of the chief impact officer, which oversees a lot of our inclusion work and our belonging work, in addition to our player community programs. And so within that seat, for me, I'm always thinking about, if we're doing an event, whether it's a culture event for our HBCU night or our Black History Month event or our Pride Night, what are some things that we need to understand about the community that we're catering to on this night? What are some potential microaggressions or just things that could be offensive, right? What does it look like to really put on an experience that feels inclusive? And for me, I bring those who identify with the community and who are allies to the table to talk about, how do we design this with you in mind and with you in conversation, rather than putting this event on for you without input and it not landing well. And so I help out with our marketing, with reviewing assets on the legal front. If there's something that's happening in the media that our ownership or team is being called out for, understanding like, how do we respond with truth and transparency? And so a lot of that is understanding our image, brand management, and our external image and identity. If it's sales, if they're trying to sell tickets, really understanding like, how do we curate and package experiences and nights in a way that as I mentioned before, resonates. And so every department, no matter where you sit, can benefit from the impact office. And because we have a pulse on community and we know what the community needs. And we have a lot of programming that touches the system and that really drives change for New Orleans and the Gulf South region.
Wonderful. Love your human-centric approach. What advice would you give leaders who want to be agile, or you want them to be able to be agile and maintain high performance as they're adapting to any challenge?
I would say the best advice that I can give leaders is to be clear on purpose, right? And something that I share oftentimes with leaders is, you can teach many things, but you can't teach passion, right? And so, making sure that you're hiring people who are passionate about the work that they're doing and the outcomes of that work.
Mhm.
Making sure that they are clear on what the purpose in which they've been called to do the work, or the purpose as to why the department or the organization exists, to really focus on building trust, and not just efficiency. Like, trust is super important, right? Are you showing up? Are you delivering? Are you invested into their professional development? Are you invested that when life happens, you're able to make adjustments and provisions to make sure that that employee can attend to their family, or that parent can attend to their child? And so really being human centric, to your point before,
Mhm.
and then also allow room for, disagreement. And so when there is a disagreement or discontent, are you responding to that from a place of defensiveness or a place of understanding? And I think that when we become more human, right, and we humanize that experience as leaders, that we can truly get somewhere. And I think in those moments of discomfort and those moments where it doesn't always feel comfortable, that's where that trust is established, right? Because an employee wants to feel the psychological safety of being able to communicate their lived realities, and even points of disagreement, right, without feeling as though they're going to be retaliated against, or, they're navigating from this cultural fear that if I mention this or say this, I may lose my job or be, terminated. And so it's really about being human in that moment, and realizing that you both put your garments on the same way every day, and that we can't always say that the policy, it holds true for everybody, because, we are, as human beings, are just so unique in our own way. And so we've got to be amenable and flexible when it makes sense.
Love that. I love your emphasis with regards to why, purpose, and trust. And I wrote down your trust. I'm not sure. What did you call it? There are three.
A triad of trust.
Your
Yeah.
triad for trust. I absolutely love the doing what you say you're going to do, doing it consistently, and doing it for the right purpose or reason. That is gold. We'll look forward to your book.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Well, we are going to take a short break, but maybe you can share with us a little bit about that book when we return. So, again, please stay tuned and we'll be right back on more Leadership Matters, informing leaders and inspiring solutions. All right. Thank you for joining us. We are back. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Dr. Loretta Howard, and with me are my co-hosts, Dr. Sheryl White and Dr. Undraye Howard. And our very special guest is Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, Vice President of Impact and Culture for the New Orleans Saints and Pelicans. Right before the break, Dr. Hutchins, Dr. Sheryl brought up your triad of trust, which you said is in the book that you're writing. So if you don't mind, before we go into our next question, would you tell us a little bit about your book? We'd be interested in hearing about it. And when can we expect it?
Absolutely. So, this book project has been a passion project of mine for the last 2 years. And the book title is Beyond Inclusion. And the purpose of that is I feel that, at least for the past 5 or 6 years, there's been so much conversation around inclusion within organizations and the workplace and folks having a seat at the table. And while I think that that's very important to have representation because it certainly helps with the bottom line from ideating within organizational culture, it's not enough, right? And so I've seen even within our leagues, I've seen people come into the organization, whether it be women who are coming into this male-dominated industry, who would have a seat at the table, but it doesn't mean that the folks at the table are listening, right? And so they are included, right? And they have a seat at the table, but they're not positioned to thrive and they're not positioned to win within these structures. And so how do we move beyond just including people and giving them a seat to say, how do you become fully valued and fully your ideas are fully considered? And how do we position you to thrive and to elevate within the organization, which goes back to the sponsorship piece and which goes back to the advocacy piece that really takes us beyond inclusion. So thinking more about systems and structures, but then also within this book, what I endeavor to do is to help people understand culture, right? How is culture, what constitutes culture? How is culture created? And really doing that from the communication as the basis, with understanding as a communication scholar, how does communication build, shape, and how does culture exist because it is communication? And so really situating the communication as a discipline within this work and really driving change and thinking about how do we create and build winning environments where employees can thrive and they can really transform organizations in very productive ways and help organizations to understand the amount of money that's lost, right? When you have cultures of fear and where there's a lack of transparency and a lack of vision and even some spaces that they perceive to be non-revenue generating and as cost centers and how those spaces can be transformed to spaces of impact and where they can't see a return on the investment. And so really helping people to rethink what culture is, the role that leadership plays in that, and the role that the organization as a collective play in really driving impact and change.
All
Love
right.
that.
Thank you.
I have to say, I absolutely love the seat at the table, not just having a seat at the table being included, but being valued.
That's
That's
right.
huge. And often we do hear about cost centers within an organization and
Mhm.
lose the the understanding of the impact and
Yes,
therefore the value of those cost centers. So, because we'll be looking forward to that
Absolutely.
book coming to fruition.
absolutely. I'm
Definitely.
excited.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Okay. So changing direction as we are nearing the end of our show, we have been asking all of our guests to share their response to these questions. What do you hope for, and what brings you joy?
That's a great question. When I think about what I hope for more workplaces where people don't feel that they need to unbold or to shrink themselves. And I think what was unique about me coming into the sports space, having spent so much time in corporate and in academia, is that there's this mindset that can exist across different sports teams that you should navigate these spaces from a place of gratefulness, right? You should be grateful to be in the NBA and you should be grateful to be in the NFL. That almost comes at the cost of you not having real expectations, right, around your professional journey and your development. And what happens when you navigate from a place of gratefulness and not expectation is you do end up getting the short end of the stick and you don't you're not in a position to really receive the fullness that you could receive, right, if you understood your worth. And so what I would hope is that people would, hold their head higher in organizations, whether it be in sports or outside of sports, that people will ask for more, right, and require more of their organizations from an investment perspective, and that they will feel confident in what they have to say because there's so much value in what many of us bring to our organizations. And I think that, if you're in a position where you have a lot of ideas and you don't feel heard, or you have a seat at the table but nobody's listening, or you're being overtalked, I think that you are in an organization that um, doesn't necessarily value you fully. And my response to that, as someone who has been in that position, is that you can have my labor, but you can't have my ideas. And so when you are in that position, you take your ideas elsewhere to people who can appreciate it, because I can tell you that, those ideas can generate millions and billions of dollars. And we are living in a time where, social media is booming. People are able to be social, and influencers. People are creating businesses every day. And when you get to a point where the very thing that you're passionate about and that you've been called to do does not seem to be flourishing and nobody's listening, it's okay to realize the writing on the wall, and to pivot. And so I hope that people don't reduce or unbolt themselves at the cost of the world not being able to benefit from their brilliance. And I think second to that, I think what brings me joy is when people realize that they have more power than they thought. And that's communities realizing that they have power, right, through agency, and then as a collective. I think that is employees, realizing that they have more power through advocacy and through allyship and sponsorship. And it's not power over people, but really power to change processes and the outcomes of people lived experiences. And when people realize that, for me as a vice president, I can make certain decisions that can alter or change someone's life for the better. I have positional power where I can put on an event that amplifies the work of a nonprofit within our community, because I know that when our teams do or host an event, that the community is listening and that they're seeing what's happening. And so, how do I leverage that power and the privilege that I have for good? Um, and I always tell people too that I think when you have conversations around privilege, a lot of times people, there's a negative undertone to conversations around privilege, when privilege is not a bad thing. I have the privilege of having doctor in front of my name. I've got the privilege of being a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. I got the privilege of being right-handed. And I've got so many privileges, the privilege of being male, right, in this society. And it's not about feeling bad about having those privileges, but how do I use those privileges for good? Because I certainly don't plan on giving them back, right? But how do I use it to give a hand up, or to help benefit those who don't have it, or who navigate these spaces at the margins in a way that they feel fully included, and that they feel like they can be in their best selves and really thrive in today's economy?
And
All
I
right,
love that, Dr. Darvelle, if I can just chime in. You gave me
yeah.
the title for the next book, right? You can have my labor, but don't touch my ideas. I love it. I love it. Love
I
it.
do. Mhm.
I love
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know our time is winding down, but I just want to thank you, Dr. Darvelle Hutchins, for being with us today. It has just been a pleasure to reconnect with you and to have you on Leadership Matters with the People's Doctors. It has just been wonderful. We hope that you will come back again, of course. And I want to thank our listening audience as well for tuning in. We invite you to send us topics that you're interested in learning more about to Leadership Matters Questions at innovisions.org. Again, that's Leadership Matters Questions at innovisions.org. We ask you to please join us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time and 4 p.m. Central Time, or download our podcast at your convenience on demand. We are on iHeart, Amazon Music, and Apple Music. So until the next time, when we are all together again on Leadership Matters with the People's Doctors, informing leaders, inspiring solutions, and as they've said in the past, keep on, keep